Hi everyone, and thank you for watching this video today or just listening to the audio, just in case you are accessing this conversation from the SoundCloud. My name is Alessandra Saviotti. I'm a curator, educator, and a toolkit editor for decentralizing political economies, this platform. And I'm very happy to be here today with Owen Griffiths. Owen is an artist, a workshop leader and facilitator based in Swansea, in Wales. Using participatory and collaborative processes, his socially engaged practice explore the possibility of art to create new frameworks, resources and systems. And this take many forms, but includes reclaiming and rethinking events, rituals and spaces of dialogue through making gardens, co-designing spaces, curating events, and making feasts. Owen explores climate, landscape, urbanism, social justice, food systems, and pedagogy, creating projects and events that prepare us for the work of the future. So thank you, Owen, for being here. Owen is gonna be one contributor of decentralizing political economies. So we are having this conversation today just to, introduce Owen's practice to the platform and understand perhaps what he would like to propose for DPE. So Owen, I would like to ask you, just to break the ice, to talk about your research a little bit first, and then how it has been changing during the course of last year in particular.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be in dialogue with you as always, Alessandra. I think over the last year specifically, I think I've reconnected with the research practice in a different way, and what's been really interesting is to think about there's a couple of quotes and a couple of things that I've been holding and been on the studio wall and been kind of present in the dialogues with many, many people around the idea of the pandemic as a portal, the idea of this last year as a kind of space to reflect about how we go forward. And also because of the way that the pandemic has exposed the inequalities and the cracks and the kind of disconnections that so many people are facing on a day-to-day level, and this particular year has really heightened this experience and with tragic effect. So, in a year of uprising, in a year of articulating kind of new ideas around climate and community, I think the research practice for me has been kind of charged with this sense of like being kind of working with an idea of urgency really, and really sort of thinking about how do we articulate around this urgency and around what we need to do to self-organize to explore these. So I've been looking a lot at models of self-organization. I've been looking at ideas of keywords as well. This is I think it's the centenary year of the philosopher Raymond Williams, and his book Keywords was obviously a very seminal text, and I've been thinking about a lot of keywords in relation to my practice and to keywords that we might co-author with communities. And for the DPE kind of focus, it's been really kind of connected to the idea of looking at a series of words which kind of spark a kind of investigation. So these words are things like collaboration, failure, urgency, long-term, community, collaborate. Yeah. So these words are kind of, words that I use all the time in the language of the projects and talking to people. But actually what I'm trying to do in this research at the moment is to break them down a little bit and to explore what they might mean to a practice and how they're used or misused or used in cultural forms all the time, but how, the word collaboration, for example, is a great one. Like we use that word all the time in lots of different contexts, but actually, it's not always used in the right way, or it's not really understood in the right way, or it's not really, we're not looking at the engineering of it or who is being empowered through that process of collaboration. So I guess the research practice has been kind of deepened and intensified through this period of time, and I feel like this is a really interesting kind of result of this time of being at home, being in the studio, being more local, and also setting up a project which is called Ways of Working, which is dedicated to this local work. So I'm an artist who works really locally anyway, and have been developing a series of projects within literally, a square mile, 2 square miles of each other in the city that I live. And I think looking at that again through this last year, it's giving a different focus to it, and it's giving a different kind of critical energy to it of what can be achieved. So if we're kind of modeling this kind of radical shifts in how we use culture and how we create spaces or host spaces for communities to work together to explore different ways of living, actually localism and working hyper locally has been a really big part of that. So in this kind of thing, we've been thinking about researching lots of different things from food systems to permaculture models to the role of indigenous culture and the way that that arts and culture kind of appropriate things from things like that all the time and not acknowledge them or not kind of work with these the true roots of these words and these movements and these things. So really trying to understand where a socially engaged art practice can sit in a time of crisis. I guess that's where the research is kind of based at the moment, but it's ongoing, of course.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you. It has been great, and also that you mentioned this idea of time, right? So I think that I read somewhere about your practice that through your research you are really trying to slow down time. And I guess like we experienced also this condition over the past year and also now. So could you a little bit explain or tell us a little bit more on this idea of slowing down time through the practice?
Yeah. Well, I think it's because often you're asked as an artist to come into a situation and work with a place or a community or a project or a gallery, and it's very time limited. And often, the first act of engagement I always feel like I'm doing is trying to slow it down a little bit and trying to ask the question of like, well, who am I working for, and how is this useful, and how does it connect to the locality, and what's the legacy of this thing, whatever we're making is going to be. So the idea of slowing down the time of this space, and also because actually slowing down the time is about kind of making this deeper connection with the place and with the people and understanding the ecosystem that you're working within. And I think that's really time sensitive. So often it's about changing an economic kind of measure of time into a social measure. So often these things are like, this is the start, this is the end, these are the results. And I'm always trying to work through that in a different way, or trying to slow it down so that we might be working in that same space, but actually we're using the time differently. And then it sort of struck me the idea of like, what is it to work with this slowness, or to make a case for this slowness in this work? And the other thing I realized in this research and this work is that I've been working with long-term relationships. And that's kind of what I'm looking for in all these projects, are longer-term relationships. Many of the works that I've been doing over the last couple of years take 2-3 years to develop. So they are slow, they're gestational, they need that kind of, they need that time to grow. And it's often really hard to get a funder or a commissioner or a gallery or whatever system that you're working with, a local authority, to understand the need for that slowness or for that kind of long-term dialogue in order to create something that will last beyond that period of time that you're working with people. So again, it's about using time differently, slowing it down, making a culture where you feel like there's endless time, even if you're working within a culture of austerity or time austerity. How do you make a long period of time feel rich and engaging and empowering? And then the other idea of like, how do we develop long-term collaborative relationships with communities and with practitioners, so that actually what we're doing is looking at a way where that whole kind of area of work will kind of develop. So a new set of collaborators, a new set of projects will emerge from that place of time.
Yeah, that's very exciting also, because I think about in respect to how like artists and curator work in relationship to institutions is always a little bit, let's say, too fast in terms of rhythm. And then, of course, it's not a case, or it's not a random conversation that we are having also together with you and the other artists and instigators of DPE platform, because the idea is really use the platform to make research visible, but also to resist a little bit the attempt to put just everything online and everything that is happening in the time of, like a lecture or something like that. So I think there are many different points of connection between your research and this platform. And I'm curious about ways of working, because you mentioned before that you are currently working for this project. So could you tell me a little bit more about this? Because is this a company, right?
Yeah, this is a social enterprise that we've set up during the last year around a kitchen table, after the homeschooling is finished and all that kind of thing. And basically, it just realized that working locally is how we can actually work with radical change in a local economy, in a local community, and really not thinking about the art world as something that we should be necessarily kind of chasing or wanting approval from, or kind of trying to interact with, or trying to force this work into an art world context. And really kind of coming to the realization that I've been doing modeling and a way for myself to work like this for many years, but actually in Wales feeling completely disconnected from the art world, or kind of how to, like a little bit like how, I don't know how to engage with it really, but actually local activism, self-organization, resolving things and changing the city and the green spaces that we kind of live and work within. It feels really exciting and really, really like the way to work at the moment. So I guess that's where ways of working came from, and also the idea of working with urgency. Like I don't want to wait for these longer term kind of ideas to come through from the art world, or like in a way, culture moves quite slowly and is quite conservative. The art world is quite a conservative space, as many people have said. But I guess if you're thinking about urgency, climate, community engagement, social, racial justice, we have to act now. We have to work in our localities. We have to dig where we stand. And I think that's what ways of working has been about and is developing. So it's a social enterprise. It's a company limited by a guarantee. They've got these legal structures, but actually it's a network of practitioners and friendships and people I've worked with for 10 years in and around Wales. And it's based on relationships, really, and the idea that, one day we'll get to this point where we can make projects with housing associations, with community gardens. We can kind of develop these dialogues based on the idea that we don't even consider this an artwork anymore. We just think, oh, it would be great to work with ways of working on this because we think they could help us develop something. And I think that's how we want the company to work, is that it has a usefulness beyond its connectivity to culture. It's actually, we are working with culture because culture is ordinary. Culture is everyday. Everybody is experiencing and producing and participating in culture in some way. So how can we bring those agendas alongside things of social and racial justice in a local economy or in a local context? So, for example, we're trying to fundraise for a big project at the moment, which is to work with a community in St Helens Road in Swansea, which is a very diverse community. It's a community I've worked in for many, many years. It's within the square mile of my studio. We've developed a garden there in the past. We've worked in the last year in conversation with the mosque and the YMCA and the ethnic youth service team in the area. And the idea is that we're going to develop a project which is about redesigning some elements of the street. So all the development money for local authority stuff finishes at the end of the street. So no money gets spent on this really interesting and really diverse street. And so we're talking about developing something which is a citizen-led kind of urban design project, where instead of people asking the council for permission to do things, the council will have to ask this group of people that we set up this kind of governance for. They'll have to ask that group of people what they can do and how they can serve that community. So rather than things being done to communities all the time, we're trying to re-engineer a conversation here where through this kind of cultural space, we're going to make some kind of mechanism where we shift the power around how a place can articulate what it needs, what it looks like, and who gets to make and do the services or green spaces or whatever that comes out of this. So how can we model alternative small-scale economic projects which support local infrastructure or childcare needs or whatever the kind of emergent processes and needs that come out of this community dialogue are. So it feels really exciting, and it feels kind of connected to place and community and this idea of modelling change. And I guess what's great about being connected to the DPE model is we can share this story, and actually we can find out there's loads of these really interesting projects happening across the world. They're just not necessarily happening in the art world. They're happening in lots of different ways. So indigenous communities, self-organized projects, radical climate change ideas. To see these projects in a network or in a rhizome of kind of connectivity is really great, and it helps build what we're doing here and helps us feel connected to a kind of bigger set of issues and concerns. And what's really exciting is we've managed to get the local authority on board, which is a really big challenge in the UK, to get local government to really believe and to really see the potential of this. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about is this idea of the long term. So I mentioned earlier the long-term relationships that we're trying to build up with communities, but the idea of how do we see our projects in the long term? So if we're creating a garden, if we're creating a neighborhood plan in the case of St Helens, which will become this infrastructure, like how does that function in 100 years? How does this relate to the questions of deep ecology, or kind of like planning or working for the next 7 generations, or working in awareness that this whole area of the city is on a tidal level and will most likely be underwater in the future? So how do we work with awareness of all these things and debunk the language and make it accessible and empowering for local people to be part of this thing? And local authority can play a really critical role in this. And I think to model that kind of relationship with the local authority is something that we're trying to develop here. And I don't know how successful or how quick it will be, but they're interested, and I think that's really critical.
Yeah, indeed, it's super interesting, because also in some other previous conversation, and of course, like this platform is about how art practices, but more broadly, how creative practices intersect with the economy and how are able to rethink actually our economy. It has been quite common to think about time as a currency rather than money, and I think is a big shift. And also, like, the economy, we can actually change the economy because we build it. So this idea of really emphasizing on time and sustainability and the long term, like you do, rather than just like the money or raising money, of course, is important to make the project sustainable, but it's not the only currency that we can use. And perhaps time is more important, and the engagement with our communities, but also building solidarities between each other, I think is quite it's quite important. So I think that through what you do with ways of working I can see that it's precisely about that, right? To kind of shift a little bit the idea of where to put the emphasis on time rather than just on money.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Franco Berardi and his words. We want more time.
Yeah.
We don't want more shopping spaces. We don't want more capitalism. We just want more time to live, to enjoy, to be together, to do things. And I think that's really critical if we can model a way of working with people where that feeling of control over one's time can come back into the space, or people can feel reconnected to their neighborhoods through these acts. I think that's really critical. And we're learning as a company and as an art practice. I'm just learning huge amounts from these dialogues with communities. It's really, 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 really interesting work, and it's really great to be working in connection with local government, with the Glenvivian Art Gallery in Swansea, with you guys, and this idea of like, how do we build a network of resistance where we can reclaim time, reclaim culture, reclaim our streets?
Yeah, cool. All right, Owen, thank you very much for this conversation. I'm really looking forward to see what we would develop together for DPE, but also beyond that. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. It's a huge pleasure to be in conversation with you always, Alessandra.
Thanks.